I got some interesting music to that intro video I've kind of noticed over time. Welcome to Tally Book Troubleshooting. I'm your host, Keith Stelter, trying to bring a little positive PR to you. One interview, one live stream, one subject matter expert at a time. Coming to you from the heart of the Permian Basin, Odessa, Texas. Man, I sure do like this place after it's growing on me more and more. I know people kind of dog on the Permian Basin, but there's some really great people out here. I really enjoy it. As always, Tally Book Troubleshooting brought to you by American Safety Services. Contact us today for permit to work, site safety folks, training, PPE. We got an environmental division, Hydrovax. Reach out today and see how we can help you move forward tomorrow. Uh, Great show today. Actually been knocking a couple of these out one after another, week after week, kind of getting back in the groove. It's nice doing it live. Next week will be a recorded episode. I got David Wallace, facility engineer, telling us all about how you get or prevent oxygen from going into your sales pipeline. It should be a nice little, episode and give me a little break from some of these live streams. Couple announcements. April 17th, Social Octane golf games coming to Ratcliffe Golf Course here in Odessa. Check it out. I'll be bringing to you some content out of that, a couple interviews. And right after that, the Permian Basin Oilmen's Bass Invitational is in Del Rio, Texas. It will be helping raise money for Make-A-Wish North Texas and New Mexico. Check it out. Sign up if you haven't already signed up for those. There's still room to do it. Reach out to myself and I'll get you with the great people organizing those events. Or if you know who it is, go get them. Go check that stuff out. It's great. A lot of stuff been going on in the Permian Basin. I had the pleasure last weekend of, I see a lot of posts and people complaining about trash in the Permian and Midland and Odessa, and people are like, what are the causes, this and that? And I was like, well, I'm not gonna sit here and debate, the causes and stuff. Let's just go out and pick up some trash. So short notice, got some people together, and actually, let's see if I can make this work and you can still hear me. But we got together last Friday and we picked up a ton of trash, tires, you name it was out there, and we barely scratched the surface. It was cold and rainy. Thank you to Bar H Oilfield Services. They drove out all the way from San Angelo just to help us do that. Brought a trailer. It was great. We had folks stopping by the side of the road to kind of help us as well. They didn't stay for the picture. So we did that in about an hour and 15 minutes, barely scratched the surface. That was Yukon Road. Yeah, Yukon Road between Faudree and the Loop. So thank you to everybody who came out. We'll try and organize another one here. I know my guest today, actually, I believe their company has done a few trash pickups and stuff. If I remember the social media posts correctly, but enough about that. You're not here to listen to me speak. You're more interested in this guy who I got coming on. Great guy. I've had the pleasure of listening to him when he was a speaker at one of my luncheons, and I think we'll have a heck of a time today. And without any further ado, Shad, welcome on board, welcome live, well, whatever it is. I'm all tongue-tied. Go ahead and tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shad Frazier. I'm the VP of Operations for Endeavor Energy. Been glad to be a part of this organization for the better part of the last 8 years. Have had a great run. As the news has kind of broke, we've been in the merger talks. So really excited for what the future holds for Endeavor and for Diamondback and what that could bring in the future. So thanks for having me on this morning.
Man, I saw your post, the cost of energy, and I knew it had to do a little bit with what you were talking about with the luncheon and stuff. And I was like, man, let's do an event with that and get I don't know, let's reach some people out there that normally haven't had a chance to speak. Speaking of that, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Say hi to Shad. Take it away. Where do you want to start? Is it what is the cost of energy anyway? Is it the drilling? Is it the people? Where do you pinpoint the start?
So when I was working on this idea of cost of energy and how to get this point across, the issue mainly comes to so many of our people here, not even in our industry, but as well as the bigger world, just don't understand what it takes to get power out of the light stream. How do you turn a light switch? What does it make up? What makes up that power? And what does it actually cost us to generate that power so that we can deliver it? One of the big issues that everyone in the Permian is dealing with right now is we are dealing with a shortage of power, and it's starting to cost us more and more for our energy every day. So, what is driving those factors? And the big issue for all of us here is we think of power mainly as an oil thing, but really there's a multifaceted approach to power. So, how do we really discuss power in a way that makes sure that we incorporate all sources of power? So, we really like to talk about that today. So, where do you want to go first?
So when you're talking about a shortage of power or electricity here, is it, your everyday user, or is it the commercial users out there that are really facing the tight squeeze? We all know about, Winter Storm Uri, that was a few years ago. Is it still being, my power hasn't gone off lately. Have they fixed all the problems? Who's facing ultimately the day-to-day, still the challenges?
So, great question. I'm trying to make sure I pull up the right charts, not to show, but to talk about. So, when we look at power across the state of Texas, uh, last summer we hit our peak power usage in the state of Texas that was just underneath 86. That was 85.5 gigawatts of power across the state. That was our peak, happened on 8/9 of last year. And what we've seen is year over year growth in that peak as we keep growing the state, as we keep adding more people, adding more industry. Texas does a great job of providing more jobs, more industry to this country and increasing our GDP. But to do that requires more power. In the state, in the West Texas, really for us that are out here, our basic power usage was under 4 gigawatts of power. So total state's 85. West Texas is only 5. So we're not a big portion. Dallas, Fort Worth, the Austin, basically Houston, the triangle uses most of the power in the state. But out in West Texas, we've seen bigger issues on the fact that we have to transmit power from where it's generated out to West Texas where we can use it. And what we've seen is a lot of our operators are now looking at power and how do we use it better, more efficiently, and more importantly, more wells we drill, the more power we need. So we've seen our power usage in West Texas go from 4 gigawatts to last summer, we hit up about 6.64 gigawatts. So we've seen almost a 50% increase in our power usage. And so far this year, we're higher than that on average for the first 2 months of the year. So we've been above 6 gigawatts all for the first 2 months. And then projections are as we get closer into the summer months, we could be closer to the 7, maybe 7.5 gigawatts. So, how are we going to get the power that we need to drive all of what we're doing? Multiple operators are out here using electric drilling rigs, electric compression. People are talking about electric frac fleets. All of this takes immense amounts of power. The basic numbers are that, you want a drilling rig. Drilling rig takes about 2 megawatts of power to drive. You need an electric compressor. That takes about 0.5 megawatts of power to drive your electric compressor. You want an e-frac fleet. That's about 30 megawatts of power. So all of these things add up. And you figure as a company itself, we use over about 120 megawatts of power every day as Endeavor. That's almost equivalent to the size of Midland. So when you're talking about one operator is using the same amount of power as a city, and then we're talking about the expansion of how do we use more of it to be cleaner in what we produce, that has a cost. So where are we getting that power and what's driving it? And that's really where you get into ERCOT. ERCOT is the power delivery system for our state, and our power delivery system works on a 3-band process. You end up having a base load of power, and our base load of power is made up of our nuclear systems, our hydrothermal systems, and coal. These are kind of our baseline where we get some of our power every given day. And in the state of Texas, that normally has been running for us, I'm trying to make sure I get my numbers right, is been running about 20 gigawatts of our 86 that we've been using. Then the renewable streams have come in. And the renewable streams are our wind, and there are solar and our power storage. So all of these add up to about 58 gigawatts. So now we're up to about 78 gigawatts. Then we have 70 gigawatts of natural gas. Natural gas then becomes the throttle. So we can build on base load. That's our base engine speed. Then we have our dynamic, which is the wind, solar, and power storage systems that can move and flux depending upon how the wind's blowing, depending upon the weather, depending upon the sunshine. So then you have natural gas. Natural gas is our throttle to either make up for where the dynamic's not working or to get us over the top when we need it when power is short. And so the state of Texas last year in the legislature passed more legislation that allowed for the more construction of more of the natural gas power distribution systems to our grid. All of this is about how do we increase our power capability while at the same time decreasing our costs.
Doesn't that increase in natural gas also solve a little bit of the issues of producing oil out here in West Texas? Isn't that a byproduct that isn't always available to ship off somewhere, and the price is a little bit depressed right now? If we utilize those natural gas and supplies, isn't that a good alternative to just flaring out here?
It's a great alternative. And that flaring number everyone talks about, when you look at the operators out in the basin, you go back to 2019, 2018, our flaring numbers across this region were in the 5 to 6% of our production. In the Permian, in the Midland Basin, we're now seeing that number below 1.5. And it's greatly been reduced because people are finding better ways of producing that power. But what I was going to before is that our power costs in the basin, if you go back to 1990, the average consumer was able to buy power at about 5-6 cents a kilowatt hour. Now that same kilowatt hour is charging 15 cents a kilowatt hour in a state that produces
yesterday.
Exactly. And so you're seeing that at your home. So the average home producer or home user has seen their mean power cost go up by about $1,600 a year. And, it doesn't seem like a huge number, but when you're someone who's working a rig, you're someone who's out on a workover rig, even our pumpers, they're all working on $60,000 a year, $80,000 a year salaries, if they're lucky. And that $1,600 could be a big hit to someone who's working from paycheck to paycheck. So how do we generate power in the most cost-effective solution possible so that we can drive costs of power down instead of up? You've seen the state of California and it's the state of Colorado is now asking to see if they can increase the power cost for natural gas to everyone's homes. At the same time as we've seen natural gas prices go down to $2 an MCF. So you're seeing power delivery people charging more while the end product is costing less that they're delivering because they're having to supplement all the renewables and everything they're putting onto the grid. Now we need all these other forms of energy, but we have to do it in the most effective way. There was a great quote that yesterday, one of the leaders of Saudi Aramco was coming out that, we have to make sure that we do the energy transition, not in a fanciful way, but in a way that makes sense so that we bring up the entire world.
I agree completely. How much of that, you said that, as the cost of the input, natural gas is going down, but the cost of the energy, the electricity is going up. How much is that due to just straight up government regulations and permitting and stuff? Is that 100% like that, or is there other hidden costs in there?
There's a lot of that. I found an interesting tidbit the other day that I didn't quite realize. Everyone talks about wanting to go nuclear and trying to put nuclear power onto our grid. And one of the interesting parts about that was the fact that in the Patriot Act, that there was a regulation put in that every nuclear reactor had to be hardened to withstand a 747 hit. Well, all of a sudden you took a nuclear reactor from being something that a lot of people could build. Now you're having to build this fanciful idea that it could withstand the strike of a jet going at 500, 600 miles an hour into a reactor and not blow up, not have an issue. So little things that we don't think much about that go into how we generate our power have greatly increased not just the cost, but the engineering design work to go in. How much more do we have to do to be able to make power a much more easily, readily available source? Right now there's a project going on at ACU, and ACU, Texas A&M, and Texas are all working in Abilene to create a new nuclear reactor. And it'll be underground. It'll be in a system that's built around on the ACU campus, and it's a small modular reactor. And that's how we're getting around the ideas of having to build these superstructures for big nuclear reactors. And they're coming up with new technology that we hope by 2030 is commercial. And at that point, you're talking about a nuclear reactor that can generate 250 megawatts of power and be on the back of end of an 18-wheeler in a trailer that could be transported to where you need and provide nuclear power in a way at substantially lower costs, at substantially lower footprint, and generate a clean power that has no residuals that are negative to the environment.
No, they've used technology like that in the past. I remember when Puerto Rico got hit by the hurricane and all the power was down there. They parked a couple nuclear subs offshore, and they were powering a lot of the island there with the nuclear power from the subs. And I think a lot of this has to come down to conversations like this, making people aware of what's going on in the industry. You talk about interesting tidbits. My old home of Canada, I would listen to a nice little factoid there that Vancouver is one of the most expensive cities to buy a home in the world, and the number one cost, and this one shocked me, Kitty, thank you, was that the majority of the cost of the home, 60% of it, was in government regulations and permits, not the drywall, not the wood, not the labor, but it was all the the regulations and the permitting. And I was just, oh my God, like, so we got to get a lot of these, make the government aware that they're getting in the way, that they're trying to help, but in the way they're hurting it a lot more than they're helping.
That's important. There's several people that are working on that inside of our industry. We had the Speaker of the House that was out in Midland yesterday, and he was out touring the field and seeing what's actually going on out here in the field and what is that driving the industry, so that he can go back to Congress and talk from a point of knowledge. So many parts of what we think is that our politicians are all knowing, they know everything that's going on. But in the grand scheme of things, most of our politicians have very little knowledge of what actually goes on out here in West Texas on a given day. Our state senator, Kevin Sparks, talking to him, and his feedback was, there's so many people that just don't understand what it actually takes to generate what we do. And the problem is the world needs more. There's just this overall arching need for more power every day. And so the regulation we put in place that curtails that more makes it harder and harder for the rest of the world to step up to where we are.
And I think a lot of people get the idea that oil and gas is against alternate energies and stuff. Like you said, we need more energy, not less of it. So you're not going to replace us, but with the population growing and the demand growing, I welcome the other inputs here, as long as they can stand on their own 2 feet and it's feasible here. We got a quick question before we get too far in the comments here. Let's see if in relation to artificial lift, what is the approximate percentage of power consumption for ESPs? I'm guessing maybe just for the Permian. Do you got a ballpark guess there?
So out of our 120, 150 megawatts that we're using, we're seeing about probably a third to a quarter of our power is being used on our ESPs. And the reason why I say that is a lot of our ESPs are short-lived in the overall lifespan of our wells. So as an operator, we've put ESPs in for the beginning life of their wells, but not the entire life. So it has a big piece of our power. But at the end of the day, where we really use a bunch of that power is not just in the ESPs, but it's actually in the compression. It's actually in the power to drive all of our equipment and on all the technology that we use on our equipment to be able to gather all the data that's around them. So, it's a big piece of it, but it's not the ultimate piece.
You mentioned early on that, West Texas, the Permian here is only a small portion of the power demands of Texas in comparison, Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Houston. But I think the real perspective is if Endeavor itself is taking in more power than the city of Midland, I think that really shows you how much power demand there is in the big cities and really how much power demand there is overall, especially the United States. Like, one company is taking more than a city. There's obviously more than one company out here doing that, and several companies that are probably larger. That is, I think, should be eye-opening to a lot of people that we're not even what was the percentage for West Texas again?
So West Texas is running about 6 against the 86 that the state uses.
Wow. Like, that's That's
Yeah.
pretty shocking. Like I thought we were a lot higher up there just because of the fracks and the rigs and the infrastructure that goes into running all this. And but I guess when you put a few million people all together in the same place, it really doesn't compare, does it?
Well, there's a lot of new technology also. We were talking about how much power we use today. Well, the question is going to be how much power are we going to use 10 years from now? And those issues, you start talking about the Bitcoin miners that are out here. The Bitcoin miners are going to transform from being just Bitcoin miners to being into AI technology centers. The same equipment that they're using that does Bitcoin work can be used for the technology side and be helping us with AI and helping us with computational power. And then you have data centers that are going to be out in West Texas. Why? Because we're at the front end of where the power is. So we're where power is cheap. Technology can drive data anywhere from wherever it's stored, but it needs power to drive it at the lowest cost. So where do you want it? You want it as close to the wellhead as or close to the power center as you can get it. So you're seeing more and more of that coming out to where the power is being generated and then being distributed across the world. So, a fun tidbit for you is if you look at the world today, the world uses 103 million barrels of oil a day. But if we wanted to have the rest of the world to live at the same standard as the United States, we would need 400 million barrels of oil a day. I think everyone on this call and everyone listening would probably agree that we can't drill for 400 million barrels of oil a day. Even if Saudi Arabia put 100 rigs on, we couldn't generate 400 million barrels of oil a day. So we
I
have to
like the
think about.
challenge though.
Well, I do too, but that's where I think we have to get into the small modular reactors. We have to have the solar. We have to have the wind. We have to have everything. It has to be an all of the above answer. And like you said, you're not going to get rid of oil. I drove to Lubbock last night, was up there doing some interviewing, and first time I'd ever seen a Cybertruck. Was driving past La Mesa coming back. People are going to be driving more and more of these electric vehicles and making that happen. Well, electric vehicles take a lot of power to charge them. And so it really ends up being, it's not replacement, it's supplemental. The additional power we need is going to be supplemental, not replacement. And the replacement has to be cleaner than what we've used in the past because the power demand is going to be that much higher.
I agree. Like there's potentials in geothermal. I think maybe not so much out here in West Texas because it's not as warm down hole. You need about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. But in East Texas, there's plenty of those holes. There's California could use geothermal. There's potential everywhere, and I think the oil and gas industry has a lot of answers and experience to help lead that way. I think if we get more people outside the industry to kind of look at the industry as like what it's doing as a whole instead of focusing in one little spot where we made a mess over here, but we generally clean up our messes and we generally look after a lot of things. It's I know some people kind of look at one thing and they're like, oh, they didn't clean this up over here, and I'm like, well, they did clean up 1,000 over here too. So it's like yelling at Santa Claus, you brought me the wrong toy when he brought a million other kids the right toy. So there's definitely got to be a pushback, and I hope once we get shout out to you for you're going out and you're anytime anybody's asking you to speak, you're going out there and speaking to kind of get the word out in front of people who the majority of people on this call or watching live is they're oil and gas. But I did try and make my wife invite 30 people from manufacturing and the medical and a few other industries. So I know there's the odd one kind of silently watching it in the background who just a lot of times they, like you said, it's just as bad as some of the politicians. They have no idea how the oil and gas industry works. And we got to get more education out there.
So a good example of that, even for us, was looking and doing some of the research. And one of the interesting things I saw was, Toyota. They're a car manufacturer, but if you really look at Toyota, have you seen Toyota build an electric vehicle, an all-electric vehicle? And their past CEO said there's a reason why. And he said, for every one electric vehicle, we can build 6 plug-in hybrids, or we can build 90 hybrid vehicles. And those hybrid vehicles can get us the miles per gallon improvement that we want to see. We drove to Lubbock last night, and we have a hybrid vehicle that drives up, and I could have driven my F-150 up to Lubbock and back. Gets 500 miles to the tank. It's great. I love my truck. Everyone who's been in town knows my truck because it's a big red Raptor that drives around. Love it to death. But it gets 14 to 16 miles to the gallon. Instead, we're driving a hybrid, and that hybrid is getting somewhere between 30 and 40 miles to the gallon. And I filled it up, and it took 12 gallons versus filling up my Ford that takes 34. So Toyota was looking at it as, how do we get the right type of vehicle to the right person who needs it? And having a hybrid or a true plug-in truck doesn't really work for a lot of my pumpers. They are going to drive further in a day than an electric vehicle can support. And electric trucks, especially when you talk about a truck that can only go about 100 miles with a load, if it's got a trailer attached to it, that's not far enough for us to do our jobs. So we have to have this balance of an EV vehicles works great if it's a commuter vehicle, but for a work vehicle, we need to have something that improves the mileage, but at the same time gets the job done. So how do we balance those two things? And the other piece of it that most people love is everyone wants to drive their Tesla. But no one wants to understand that for every 1,000 Teslas, you have to dig up the equivalent of Jerry World out of the ground and strip mining to create the minerals and all the rare earths that you need to create those vehicles. Is that something you want to do? People don't want to ever see a strip mine. They always think they're the ugliest thing on the earth. Well, look at your Tesla and equate it to a strip mine, and because that's really what had to happen to make that vehicle happen.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more to the story than a lot of people think, but they're like, well, it's not in my backyard, so I'm saving the planet. And at the end of the day, it's just not working that way. And investment or where the narrative is, and I think it's slowly changing. A lot of the big auto companies have started to tone down or even shut down their EV divisions and waiting for other technologies. Hydrogen's coming along as well. We got another question here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we can, how you want to frame it, but what strategies or technologies is Endeavor currently employing to optimize electric power consumption operations? Now, if you don't want to speak directly to Endeavor, maybe there's something out there you can share that's a generic one that you know of.
And Eduardo, love the question. Sorry, we're in a merger talk, so I can't talk about Endeavor specifically or any of the details about us. It's just part of the rules right now. So, but what's happening in the industry overall is that multiple people are trying to figure out how do we use the power most efficiently. Diesel is not the most efficient system for driving a rig. Finding electricity power is there. It's a great way to get more efficiency. Had conversations yesterday with a power company that delivers power for frac fleets. Making diesel engines on frac pumps may not be the best source. You can use a much bigger pump, drive much more power with an electric system, and have less equipment having to be transported. There's other examples where, I work on the roads committee for the PSP out in the Permian Basin, and you look at their sand mines. The sand mines, simple technologies we didn't think about, but they're transporting sand by belt over 40 miles to get trucks off the road. So those trucks are not having to travel so far to the mine to get the sand delivered. Our trucks are some of the most inefficient vehicles that we have out here. And any way we can reduce the amount of vehicles on our roads and the loads on our roads, the better off we all are, because we all know the road to Mentone is just a death trap. And trying to make that road safer any day with other technology is great. So how do we think outside of the box and find ways where it may not just be power, but it also can be engineering design ways to improve our overall efficiency that we work out here that then helps us deliver more energy to where we can deliver it where it's needed most.
What, if you had the chance, you talk to someone, very open-minded, has nothing to do with the oil and gas industry, no idea about it, and they wanted to know more, where would you start them? What direction would you bring them to? What understanding would you try and make in the simplest terms? If somebody actually stumbles upon this, where do we start? Give advice to everybody out there who might run into somebody the same.
So I think the best thing to do is find the people that speak most well about what we're doing. Alex Epstein has his book out there, and promote him any way you can, because he does a great job of putting it out there, not in technical terms, but with data. But he doesn't do it where he's talking over the top of people, because he's not an engineer, he's a philosopher. And he's trying to convince people to understand that industry itself, the energy industry itself, brings up the quality of life for everyone. The more we use the energy industry, the better we can make everyone's life. There's a direct correlation to power usage and GDP. And there's so many more benefits to society. I used one in the past where there's a direct relationship between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And you go back in time, and the Dominican Republic spent the time and energy to put in a power grid and put in a hydroelectric system. And I may be misquoting, but when they put all this in, and they did this in the 60s, they invested in their power grid. The other side of the island, this is one island in the Caribbean, the other side of the island stayed with using trees and lumber as their main primary source for being able to make power, and imported a lot of diesel in to make power for their system. Well, you look at the GDP of that island, one half of the island is 4 to 5 times greater than the other half, because of just the ability to have cleaner power that was more reliable. Having hydroelectric systems that ran 24 hours a day made one half of the island be able to improve their infrastructure, improve their ability to manufacture, improve their ability to create so they could then export. So that's one example. And one of the big things I always talk about is when you go out to West Africa or anywhere in Africa where most people are living by a stove, and that stove is fueled by wood or dung. And you talk about the fact that there are 3 billion people, 3 billion. We have 300 million in the United States. So, we're talking 10 times this amount of people that don't have a light switch, that don't have a refrigerator. And how many of those people are the next Einsteins that were never found because they spent all day collecting a gallon of water or collecting wood so they could have one more meal a day? Those are the advantages that we don't talk about that we're missing through this transition. It's not about we have to clean the environment. We have to raise up the society as a whole. And, the more we raise up society, the better off we all are.
Does that always then, go back to the argument, the CO2 argument, where, we're just making too much CO2 and that's the killer of all things, and at the end of the day where it's actually 0.04% of the atmosphere and we've barely moved the dial in 100 years? Is it just a matter of somebody got on a tear with it and a lot of other people got on board and just went forward? Is that the reason why we've stopped that message? Because I believe, North America, Europe, Russia, they do well because of their access to oil and gas and energy, and they were able to build off that. To take that away from other emerging people, like you said, 3 billion, is that really what we want to do?
And it's not take away. And that's the one thing I think people need to understand, is that what we need to figure out is how do we get them the power they need in the cleanest, most efficient way possible, but doing it in a way that is the lowest cost for them to be able to develop it. It doesn't take much to put a solar panel on top of a person's home, but that solar panel is not going to drive a refrigerator. It's going to drive a charging panel where they can have a cell phone. So then now they have access to data. They have access to information. They can learn more. They don't have to go into town. They can stay where they're at and get information. But how do we truly raise up the industry so that they can then smelt iron, they can manufacture products? How do we get enough power to really generate technology as a whole to raise up the entire society is the question. So really what we're talking about here is CO2 is an issue. Plain and simple, it's an issue. Yes, man has impacted the world. But the problem is, even if the United States went to net zero, India and China alone will outpace our net zero decrease with their CO2 increase. So we can do all we want and still have no effect on the environment, because other players, other actors are having their influence too. So unless it was a worldwide, which what the Paris Accords were supposed to be about, but they didn't hold everyone accountable. So you have certain countries that are not listening to it and doing their own thing that are affecting everybody. So we as a society have to do what's best for everybody, lift everybody up, and at the same time find ways to create power in a more economical fashion so that we don't burden the rest of the world. The number the other day was that you were in Congress, they were asking Jim Carrey or Senator Kerry, who's the climate czar, how much are you wanting us to spend to go to net zero? And the number was something like $4 quadrillion was going to have to be spent to get us to net zero. Well, that doesn't make sense. You can't cripple the United States economy to go to net zero and let China and India, but you have to do something so that we can get the technology, such as the ASMR, the nuclear reactors, the small modular reactors. We have to spend the money. We have to be taking on some of the burden, because we have to find ways to create energy so that we can raise everybody up. But we can't just push it off and say it's a China and India problem, it's not ours. So we have the ability to bear some of that burden, but we have to get the whole world to bear it with us.
Do you think it's just PR for the reason why, solar and wind gets pushed a lot more than nuclear does? Do you think it's, knowing maybe past disasters, or is it movies? What is your take? Why don't we push more nuclear as it is? There's no carbon emissions with it.
With all things, I always say legislation, you follow the money. And the right money's been pushing forward the solar and the wind. And there's nothing wrong with them. They are good products that are generating a change. The state of Texas, when you look at it, we are at 25 to 40% of our power grid is now supported with wind and solar. But the problem is, we all found out in Uri, is that only works when the wind blows and the sun's out. So goes back to that statement before. We have to have wind and solar and nuclear. Wind and solar, nuclear, and oil and gas. It all has to be supplemental. It can't be replacement. Because at the end of the day, we have to have consistent, clean power to make everyone better.
I agree. That's definitely the way forward. What do you think it'll take to get us to a place where we are able to push all that together, instead of, a lot of people are, under the impression always, when you push one, you're taking away from another. What do you, what will finally, in your opinion, do us in where we finally figure out we need all of them?
I think at the end of the day, it's where you stop realizing that it's not a replacement, and really talking about this is a fact. This has to be complementary, and it's so much harder to put up walls than it is to reach hands across and lift everyone up. And I think that's one of those things that we have to do a better job of, is not trying to push the wind and the solar away, not be so detrimental. We can have the message that we want to be, there's people out there that push heavy carbon lifestyles. I'm okay with that. If that's your message, fine. But at the same time, I think it's better if we raise everybody up so that we all have a better chance at living the life that, we all have been granted. The question I got asked the other day in church is, how do you feel like you've been blessed? And in my life, I said the one thing that, in my mind, when that question was going through, is like the one thing that I got blessed primarily is I got born in this country because of the, what this country has allowed me to do by where I'm at. So how do I then carry that blessing on to others? Well, the best thing I can do for others is do what I do today. Find ways to make more energy cheaper and more readily available, and export that across the world. Find ways to make the cleanest barrel we can make, the cleanest amount of natural gas that we can make, export that to all the other places of the world, and raise everybody up. And if we do that, and we can find ways to make better solar panels in the process, how we make better windmill blades so that we can make better wind, all of that is additive, not replacing. We raise the whole world up when we do that. So it really ends up being this whole kind of message that we have to get together and, put our hands together, because the great thing about our industry is that we will overcome any challenge that's been given to us. We have some of the best engineers in the world out here drilling, trying to explain to people last night at this session I was at, we're drilling wells 2 miles into the ground, going 2 miles under the city of Midland, developing oil that's out here with technology that most people don't even understand. And we're doing it out of rock that looks like what's on your kitchen table is made out of. That doesn't look like it should be able to produce anything. And we're making hundreds of thousands of barrels a day out of it. That's because of the technology and the, acumen of the people in this industry. How do we leverage that to make things better? And we're doing it every day with more engineers going into the solar side of things, helping out the oil and gas space. I have electrical engineers in my oil and gas company, and those electrical engineers are helping us build better electrical grids, building better harmonic systems, and helping them make a better grid for the rest of the United States from the lessons that we're learning on how we use power in our grid. So it really is about how do we task and train and push our people to be better so that we can take what we've learned to the rest of the world.
Well said, sir. Anybody out there have any questions for Shad here? We're getting into the 40-minute mark. We're going to start winding down here in the next few minutes. In the meantime, you're oil exec. You're a high up guy. You don't deal with a day to day. You don't call out a rig every day. You don't, this. But when you run into, let's say, a particular vendor or somebody that, oh man, that's a great idea. And I'm just talking from, there are lots of salespeople are tuning in. How do you, as a guy who doesn't deal with the day to day, how do you make the call whether to, man, I'll let my people know about this, or I'll do my own research? Does that occur to you?
So good question. And, like I said, I had a meeting yesterday with a company, and, I don't make the decision. I have people that make that decision and pass it up to me if they need approvals or greater authority to make those type of decisions. But no, I'm not an electrical engineer, and I will be the first to say that I passed Texas Tech with my one electrical engineering class with a 36 because our class average was 27 in electrical engineering, and the teacher was terrible. So yeah, I know enough to
understand. Brave of you to admit that.
I understand that I had really minimal knowledge of electricity, but I also serve on the committees that are trying to teach future engineers and trying to make sure that doesn't happen. But going back to your question, when vendors are calling on me, the first thing I'm going to do is push them to the people that are making the decisions for me. And I love hearing pitches, but I don't have time to sit and pitch meetings. So when vendors and people want to call on me, and people will, my LinkedIn, I've got probably a better 1,200 to 1,500 members on my LinkedIn community. And, the worst thing in the world is when someone out of the blue is hitting me up on LinkedIn and saying, hey, I really want to sell this pitch of the, such and such a product. And the first thing my response is going to be, this is the person you need to contact. They are the person that's the gatekeeper of that before it comes to me. I can't help you. But if you reach out to them and really trying to, instead of going to the top of the ladder as a salesperson, understand who the decision makers are at the front line and really helping them make decisions so that they can pass it up. So instead of wasting time and energy trying to convince me about something, convince my people that are the ones that are doing the work. Figure out the org structure. Ask who the right contact is. Instead of trying to pitch me, ask who's the contact that could help make that decision and see if this is something you could use. I think that's the best answer you could get, because the frontline workers out here, there's, the city of Midland's average age is now 34. So that means most of our engineers are under 35 that are in this town. And they don't have the breadth of exposure of LinkedIn. They don't have the breadth of exposure to all the meetings, to all the places that get contact. And I think as a salesman, your best option is trying to figure out who those players are and then letting them pitch the idea up.
Do you encourage your people, those decision makers, to be open to new vendors, new pitches, new ideas? Or is it a matter of, man, it's not broke, let's not try and fix it kind of thing? Is that the mentality that's kind of pushed a little bit more? I'm just, as a guy, I thought we'd have a couple questions here, but I guess we'll just wrap up pretty quick here. But then now I'm using the time just for myself. Why not?
We're all your friends here. It's all good. So I would say that I am a technology pusher in my group. And so, sorry, someone just asked a question.
No problem.
I push technology into my teams, and I push them to ask the question, how do we get better today? What's the 1% we can do better each day? And so is that something new that we need to be thinking about? Is that a new technology? And I never want my teams to ever think that they can't try something. as one of our sayings around here is we want to fail fast. We want to go try stuff. If it fails, figure it out, change out, move on to something different. We had an artificial lift trial we brought out, put it out for 6 wells. It failed miserably. We changed 6 weeks into brand new wells coming online and changed over to what worked. We realized real quick that our technology trial was not doing what it was supposed to be doing. So we failed fast, and that cost us. But at the end of the day, we tried something, and we figured out why it didn't. We looked at it, we did a post appraisal, and we figured out why it didn't. And so it wasn't just it failed. It failed why? What would we do different next time? And then how would we do something better about that going forward?
Realistic question. I guess this would be for the gatekeeper, and every gatekeeper is going to be, unique. Some are going to respond to emails, some are not. When you were that guy who was making the decisions, were emails worth sending to you?
Emails are always that front. It's kind of like a resume. When someone puts a resume on your desk, is the email tempting me enough to make me want to ask more? And if it's too long, too verbose, it's a bait, it's a hook that you're dipping into the water, right? You're a fisherman trying to get something to bite. And is it flashy enough? Is it enough to get my attention that makes me want to think, how can I apply this? So is the email the right message? Are you showing me in your email where you've tried something and it's worked for somebody else? Why wouldn't you want to try this? Here's how much we saved for company X. And it's hard. Getting an email through the gate, my wife always laughs. She looks at my email box, and my email box I keep clean. I have less than 5 emails in my inbox at any time. I file everything the way I need, but everything that comes through my gate, I'm clicking in and out of pretty quick through meetings and other stuff. So how is that hook? Am I going to read something in the first 4 to 5 lines that there's enough for it to grab my attention, to make me want to think I should pass this on to someone to have them take a look at it? So when you're making that pitch, it has to be, I have helped with company X. Company X saved X amount of money, produced X amount of more, improved their overall efficiency by Y. What are those key tags that show that your product is unique, different, that ought to be tested? I think that would be my biggest hint to anyone, a salesman that's reaching out and looking out, is how is it more than, hello, Mr. Frazier, you don't know me. My name is so-and-so. I work for company X, and we present this product XYZ, and we really think you ought to use it.
Yeah, you just even my own what's worked on email or LinkedIn, 1 or 2 sentences. I already assume you don't know me. I don't have to let you know that already, so there's no sense wasting that verbiage. But no, appreciate it. We have a little bit of a statement and then of a question here. I've been in the oil and gas industry 25 years, agree wholeheartedly with everything said. What I don't understand is why our politicians don't understand the importance of energy. And I think you went through that. They don't live in this world, and they stay in their own bubbles. They should be sending the message being sent here. What is their problem? I guess.
So let's talk about that. Who makes up most of our politicians? Yeah, we see the politicians that are in Washington, D.C. There are those that have been up there 10, 20, 30 years and never been anything but a politician. But most people that serve in those roles are people that are in day-to-day jobs. You're seeing more and more people running these days that have opened a small business or been a farmer, been a lawyer, done some of these things, and then earned a seat because they thought it was important to run. What is really changing in the dynamic of government is the fact that we're getting rid of some of these career people and getting the average Joe. Well, the problem is the average Joe in the oil patch lives out here in the Permian, or they live in very isolated areas where oil and gas is put. And we don't have that many elected officials. So our election base is so small that we can only elect one person into the Texas Senate. One person out of all the senators in Texas that understands oil and gas is tough. And we expect politicians to know everything, but Governor Abbott came out here a couple of years ago, and we were all amazed by just how little he understood about one of the biggest industries that supports his candidacy every year. But it's because he's asked and tasked with, he has to know everything about technology. He has to know everything about the healthcare system. He has to know everything about the banking system.
Education.
Right. He has to have full staffs that have been tasked with understanding all this and presenting him with the best ideas, and taking a 500-page book and filtering it down to a single page with bullets that he can read. So we can't expect our politicians to know everything. What we have to do is help our politicians understand the most important facts. So by doing talks like this, by getting this message out, because when we talk, it has to be not to Governor Abbott, it has to be to Governor Abbott's handlers. And Governor Abbott's handlers are the ones we need to be talking to, that present him with the bullet points of what are the most important facts. And the more people,
and a lot of the government employees themselves, I've found their influence overall, I think, is probably not stated enough. I think a lot of it, especially on the federal side, I think the government employees who have been there 20, 30 years are really, their influence is a lot bigger than we think, and they're the real gatekeepers, they're the real doers. And while you wonder why some of this stuff can't happen, so the next question is, like, when are you going to run?
Yeah, everyone asks that. I got a plenty of big enough job right now and love the people I work with. So, down the road, someone joked with me today about, dude, you ought to run for railroad commissioner. It's like, well, who knows? Maybe down the road when I'm ready to not do this, because I really do this right now. But I think one of the big issues, though, that we need to work hard at is our institutions of engineering training, our institutions of trade labor training. How many kids are we getting to come into our industry? I graduated in the smallest class in the petroleum engineering industry in 1996. When the numbers came out, there were 111 engineers that graduated that year out of the United States. So super small, because oil was $12 when I went into the oil patch into college. No one was going into petroleum engineering. Though we're having that same issue today. Most of the colleges are having a tough time getting kids to come into the industry, because in their high schools, they are taught that oil is bad, not the good that oil has done. Their high school teachers are not armed with the information to understand what they're talking about when they talk to their kids. And the kids then have this bad idea of what we do and negative influence. A good example the other day was someone was talking to Google's AI image processor and said, give me an image of the oil and gas industry versus the wind and solar industry. And the first image that came up was oil and gas spills of oil everywhere, with birds covered in oil with all the negative, and the green gas and all that's on the other side. And then he said, well, let's refine this to refine your image to the good that each of these industries has done. And then all of a sudden the picture started to change. And then it said, show me an image of how the oil and gas industry compares to solar, and how much good that both of them have done for all society to lift everything up. And now all of a sudden you have a picture of the oil and gas industry providing medical use, providing technology for people, providing goods and services and transportation. And the other side of it was, wind and solar is doing the same thing, building everybody up. And I think that's the problem, is that we have to get the message right. We've got to help everyone to understand that there is a message of energy is good for all. And how we develop it, we've got to get better at it. We've got to be cleaner at it. We've got to make sure we hold our peers accountable if they're not doing things right. That's one of the big things, that, all it takes is one bad actor to make the rest of us look bad. So how do we get everyone to hold those standards up, and then raise us up to be the light, to be the beacon on the hill of how we are generating power for the rest of the world?
And like Jen here is saying, get involved with your local oil and gas associations. There's lots of people out there trying to make a difference. The Oil and Gas Workers Association, which I was working with before, which you came and spoke at, they try and lobby the government and get behind candidates that are pro oil and gas, and get more and more education out there. I think everybody can do a part in that, right? Any oil and gas worker, you have in-laws, you have family that doesn't work in the industry. Make sure you're telling them what's what, and help spread the message. And you just never know. The right person might hear the right message and and we might be able to turn this thing around sooner rather than later.
There's opportunity for anyone to be involved. All it takes is time. But time is our most precious resource because it's never replenished.
And willingness to help too is a lot of times people are just like, I don't want to get involved. And I am seeing more and more people want to get involved. Shad, thank you very much for doing this. Is there anything else you want to shout out or close out with and let people know before you go? Any charity shout outs, any events coming up?
Enovex is coming back into town with their fossil fueled event that's coming up in April. That's going to be a big event that then helps raise up Oil Patch Kids for the Permian Basin. So it's going to be a great concert that'll be held at the Horseshoe Arena. And the concert, all the funds and proceeds from that concert, I forget who's playing, but it's a pretty good artist if I remember right. I don't know. We'll post it out in the links down below, or if you look it up, Fossil Fuel by Enovex. That's going to be a great event coming up in the month of April. So, look for that. It's a great time to get together. And, I think there's several good speakers that are talking earlier in the day and a great concert at the end of the day. So those are going to be fun events.
Perfect. There's actually an event too. I forgot to mention earlier, March 23rd. The DPS and MZ Foundation is raising funds for the victims of the Panhandle Fire. Check out their event that's coming up over in Midland. And I think Keep Odessa Beautiful is also having a trash cleanup on March 23rd as well. So there's never a dull moment in the Permian. There's always something to do. I know it may be brown and dusty sometimes, but it's got great people and always trying to help out everyone. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. And check us out. Tally Book Troubleshooting brought to you by American Safety Services. Contact us today. We'll help you out. Safety, environmental. And until next time, that's how you troubleshoot.